Chapter 1. The Seals on the Beach. The day was ending. The sea was weary. It had been whipped into a fury, fighting the land, fighting itself, as though it too were mad with anguish. Now it was heaving exhausted, swelling waves, draining them onto the land in a forlorn weeping. Foam tears pooled in the dunes. The waves returned momentarily to their home before they flowed forward in another outsurge of grief. On the low rocks on the south of the bay, an old man and his granddaughter were sitting watching the sea in silence. Both were dry-eyed. Tulikki held her knees to her chest, her cheeks resting lightly as she hunched over, waiting, watching the sea in silence. She had chosen the highest rock in the group, uneven and covered with small, sharp edges. It gave her the best view over the sea. Petri had chosen a smoother, lower rock, which allowed him to perch more comfortably, his feet resting on the wet sand. The day they had both known would come had finally come. Tulikukka, Tulikki's mother, had died. She had been sick for a long time, long enough for everyone to say farewell. She had been sick for too long, long enough for even those closest to her to feel a guilty wish that this day would finally come and that Tulikukka would be no longer in pain. It should have been long enough to feel prepared, but when it finally happened, no one was really ready. All the practical things were prepared and organised, but in the immediate shock afterwards, no one knew what was the right thing to say or do. Jill and Tulikki had been alone with Tulikukka when it had finally happened, one on each side of the bed. At first they sat in silence, staring at their beloved Tulikukka. Then Jill had taken Tulikki into her arms, and the pair had rocked back and forth, shedding quiet tears. When Anna arrived, bringing a basket of freshly baked bread and 3 mackerel, they were still coiled in each other's arms. When she heard the news, Anna embraced Jill and Tulikki in turn, and then bustled about the kitchen, preparing a meal none of them particularly wanted to eat. After the meal, Anna asked how she might help, and Jill asked her to let her brother Petri know what had happened, as well as sending messages to the Selkie and other islanders. The funeral would take place the next day. When Petri heard the news from his sister, his first thought was of Tulikki. She was his granddaughter and would need somewhere to stay. He was ashamed that he was the reason his son Nestori no longer lived on the island, but he could put some of that to rights by taking care of Tulikki. Petri carefully cleaned the room that had been Anna's when they were children. He removed the pile of clothes that needed mended and that had been left on the bed. He put it in the sewing basket. He washed the windows and cleaned the floor. He ironed the fresh curtains and hung them. He made up the bed with fresh linen. Finally, he went out to pick some heather and a few daisies, which he placed beside the bed. He added a few shells to complete the decoration. Then he had stumped over to the cottage to pay his respects and tell Jill they would take care of Tulikki. He'd thought to mention it several times during Tulikukka's illness, so everyone knew there would be nothing to worry about. Of course, it would have been better if Nestori, Petri's son and Tulikki's father, had been on the island to raise his daughter. But he lived in the sea as a seal all the time now, and that was all Petri's fault. Petri and Tulikki were here on the beach, waiting to talk to the Selkie. Petri hoped that he might see his son, but he knew it was no use. Petri had sworn he would never set foot on the island while Petri was alive. He stayed on the sea in his seal form, but his mother, Rianda, returned to the island to visit Petri. She no longer walked on the island either, but she would visit in her seal form. Petri looked at his granddaughter, trying to see signs of Nestori in her features. It wasn't hard. Tulikki shared her father's round, open eyes and sleek dark hair. But Petri wasn't just looking for physical resemblance. He was looking to see whether Tulikki felt the pull of the sea in the way her father had at her age. Sometimes you could see a child was going to be a shaper, even when they were babies. Some even began reshaping when they were little, using it as part of their play. But these were usually shapers who took animal forms like cats or bird forms like ravens. Then there were those like Petri's Aunt Mary, who never really seemed at home in their human form, and when they reshaped, they stayed in their animal form. No one had been surprised when Mary had told her birth family that she had met a seal and decided to raise a family with him. She often visited them and brought her pups with them in the spring. Petri enjoyed playing with his seal cousins. As a young man, Petri had been proud to be chosen by a Selkie woman. Many of the fisher folk from the islands met the Selkie. There were some skerries not far from Carrion Bay, where the youth from the sea and the youth from the land liked to meet. The Selkie would stay on the rocks with their sealskins round their lower parts, ready to slip away. The island youth could show off their best skills with their small boats to keep themselves off the rocks. It was hard to sing and pay attention to the sail, the wind, the waves, and the rocks. Often another islander would miss a beat and run their boat onto a rock, requiring the other youth to push him off. The Selkie never helped. If they stayed on the rocks at all, it was only to laugh. More often, the approaching boat would be met with a quiet splashes as the Selkie reformed as great seals and entered the water. Petri loved to sing with the Selkie and soon found that the duets with Rianda were the sweetest. He wanted to spend more time with her, but didn't know how to ask. Sometimes she swung alongside the boat, which left Petri feeling as though he'd stepped out of his own skin. Then came the autumn, when Petri's father began to forget things. At first it didn't seem like much, a forgotten key, a forgotten name, a forgotten plan. But every time the tide rose, he rose too, and worked beside Petri, lifting the nets as he had done since he was a boy. Petri noticed that his father wasn't as strong as he used to be, and so Petri took more of the weight. Once Petri suggested that he could lift the nets alone and that his father could watch the lobster pots. Once was enough. He didn't suggest that again. Instead, he watched his father struggle to put on his shoes, struggled to put on his around the room, lurching from chair to chair as he moved about the kitchen, and accusing the nets of deliberately forming knots. These things made Petri feel sad and helpless. But the thing that made him feel afraid was when the older man seemed to forget who was father and who was son and called Petri Da. Then came the terrible, wonder-filled night that changed Petri's life forever. His father was lifting the nets, but missed his footing and stumbled. When he recovered, he turned to face the sea, leaning over the side of the boat with an expression that Petri had since spent many hours reflecting upon. Determined? Happy? Young? Petri could never decide, but he could also never forget the sight of his father pushing himself forward into the sea. Petri called and circled the boat for what seemed like hours before he saw any sign of life. Eventually he saw a body in the water, but the body he saw was not his father. It was Rianda, swimming in fully human form. She swam towards the boat and heaved herself up against the side. She accepted Petri's hand as she stepped lightly onto the craft. Her sealskin was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she wore a tightly fitting garment made of fish scales. Your father is in the deep now. He will be dead before morning, she said. He's not dead yet. How can you keep him alive under the water? Petri asked, confused, not wanting to believe what he heard. Your father was a friend of the Selkie. We saved his stories. Tonight we will tell him his stories, and when he remembers himself, he will glide willingly into death, and we will bring you his body for burning. Rianda explained gently, her large grey eyes seeking his gaze. But now you must tend to your craft. There's a squall rising. Petri turned and saw the shift on the water's surface. With a practiced movement, he untied the one rope to release the sail. But when he reached to tighten it on the other side, he felt Rianda's hand was already there. Together they guided the boat back to the family jetty. Petri's mother had died 10 years earlier, giving birth to Anna. It was Anna who met them on the jetty, warped up in warm seal furs, holding a lamp and a basket. You were away for so long. I could see you circling. Did you find a herring shell? Where's Da? I brought you both warm juice and bread. Then she caught sight of Rianda and her face lit up. A Selkie lady, here with us. Can I touch your hair? Petri felt Rianda's spine stiffen and recoil. Then she shook herself and crouched low so that her eyes were level with her little girl's. Anna put down her basket and stroked Rianda's hair. She brought it towards her face and breathed in deeply. With her eyes closed, a smile formed on the small girl's lips. We bring sad news, Rianda said. Da! Anna's eyes snapped wide open. She looked along the boat and up at Petri, who was tightening the ropes. He nodded. Anna slipped into Rianda's embrace, her fingers tangled into the silky black hair. Rianda breathed in the scent of Anna's skin, as though they had always been a family. After that, Rianda stayed in human form. She helped arrange the funeral pyre. She talked with the Selkie and brought Da's body home. She washed the old man's body, wrapped it in white bindings, and wove the willow mat to carry his body down to the beach where it was burned. She was with Petri and Anna when they spread the father's ashes in the sacred grove. She stayed with Petri and Anna as they mourned their father. She lifted the nets beside Petri, and soon he saw that she was the better sailor and gave her the tiller. She milked the goats beside Anna and taught the girl how to make cheeses as well as butter. When they were together, the three of them sang. When they were singing, Petri and Anna didn't feel the absence of their father too strongly. When Rianda spent time in the sea, Petri and Anna thought of their father and were silent. Some months later, Petri suggested it was time they tidied the contents of their father's room. They took out his clothes, some of them still smelling of wood smoke and fish gut, despite their laundry arrangements. Those that were serviceable were put to use. Those that could be altered to fit were altered. The rest were cut into patches for other use. The marriage bed that Dad had built for Mum was carried out into the yard. Was I born in this bed? Anna asked. Petri heard the unasked question. Did Mum die in this bed? No, Petri replied truthfully. She wanted her sister Mary to join us for your birth, and Mary had joined the Great Seals by then. Mary wasn't a Selkie, and she couldn't change into human form anymore. She was all seal, but she remembered being human, and when she had pups, she brought them ashore for us to play with them. When Mum felt that you were coming, she went down to the shore, to the rock shelter where we go for picnics when it's windy. You were born almost a month early. That's why Da wasn't at home. He was out with the lobster pots, and it was just me at home. I was making butter. Mum told me it would take a while, and I should send Da down when he came in. Petri paused, remembering that day. Mum was already dead when Da came down to the rock shelter. Mary was feeding you as though you were her own pup, and she fed you day and night on seal's milk until you could stomach goat's milk. But she couldn't tell Da what had happened, being a seal and all. It wasn't until you learnt to walk that a Selkie man came to the house to talk to Da. That's when we heard that you'd come out in a huge big rush still inside your birth sack. Mary had opened the sack with her teeth, and out you'd popped like a little mermaid. Cradled you in her arms and sang to you, and then she laid you down on the sand and started to twitch. It was her heart. Mum always had a huge big heart, and it just burst with love for you. That's what Da always said. Rianda sanded the wood of the marriage bed and carved patterns of seaweed and fish souls into it. Petri collected several fungi, surprise webcap and dyer's polypore, from the woods close to the Swala marsh further inland. They boiled the mushrooms and mixed the dyes with resin to bring out the patterns in shades of purple, yellow, and green. Anna unpicked the stitches on one side of the mattress and took out the straw. She placed it around the strawberries and put the rest to rot with the goat manure. Then she filled it with soft, dried grasses and added some clover and heather sprigs from the goat patch and sewed the seam up again. Then all three of them went through the rag bag and sewed patches together to make a new cover. When everything was ready, the room didn't look like Da's room anymore. It was Rianda and Petri's room. But before Rianda and Petri moved into the room, Petri asked Anna to go for a long walk to Mestella Spur and to bring back something to decorate the doorway. She told her she could choose anything she liked, but it should come from that particular part of the island, even though it would mean walking for an hour in each direction. Anna was happy to go. She loved Rianda and wanted to make her feel welcome. It took Anna a long time to find something suitable, but finally she found a perfect piece of driftwood. It was shaped like a lizard, and it was smooth to touch. On her way back, she saw some phoenix berries that she knew were not poisonous, but still not pleasant to eat. They were a beautiful reddish orange and smelt like wood ash. She picked a few of the tiny tear-shaped berries and pressed their juice into the driftwood. The effect was better than she dared hope. The wood turned a rusty orange, just like a salamander. It took Anna quite a while to stain the wood evenly, and she thought that Petri and Rianda might be worried that she was away for so long. But when she returned to show them what she had found, they seemed startled that she had returned so soon. Petri's clothes were rumpled, and Rianda's hair was not as sleek as usual. Anna soon saw what they had been doing to become so rumpled. On the porch there was a beautiful new rain barrel. No doubt it had been very heavy to carry. The wood was thick and the bronze bands shone beautifully. But why was it on the porch? Surely it belonged under the drain pipes. She peered into it and saw that it already contained water. A sniff. Sea water. Anna turned back towards her brother, who stood in the doorway, his arm resting lightly on Rianda's hips. It's for my sealskin, Rianda smiled. Petri wants me to be able to return to the sea whenever I wish. And for many years, that was how they lived. Rianda came and went as she wished. Petri and Anna lived on the land, and they were happy. Petri sighed, remembering how happy he had been.